Thank you everyone for joining today. It is my pleasure to present this webinar for you. So today we're talking about integration using Azure Service Bus EAI, EDI in a hybrid environment. And I'm especially excited about this technology because I truly believe integration in B2B scenario is more amenable in the cloud, and more specifically Azure. A little bit about Salon before we get started. We are a national systems integrator. We have offices in Hartford, New York, Boston, Tampa, DC, Southern California. We are a Microsoft partner with multiple gold competencies, Windows Azure certified, and we also participate in the VTS program. Now, before we get into the agenda and what we're going to cover today, I'd like to kind of kick it off with a poll. So today's poll, I'm curious to see some of your biggest challenges that you've experienced with integration. So I've listed a few of the popular ones here. So just take a second and kind of make your selection here before we move on. Okay, definitely complex security configuration. We've definitely seen that. I think this is great. Thank you very much. Switch back over to the presentation. Today's agenda, why integrate in the cloud? I think, discussing some of the compelling reasons why this is so exciting and why we should start forward thinking about how do we start integrating in the cloud and why does it make sense. We'll talk about that to kick it off. We'll also talk about BizTalk server briefly, but really focus on the cloud piece, which is infrastructure as a service, and more specifically, platform as a service. We'll spend most of our time on that. So around platform as a service, the third agenda item is Azure Service Bus, the EAI, EDI Labs Toolkit. And so the first part of this is going to be the EAI overview, how to do messaging on the service bus on the cloud. And then also, we'll dive right into a demo, and I'll actually show you an application that's doing order processing over the cloud with zero infrastructure. So it's a pretty simple demo, but it shows you some of the compelling reasons why this is pretty exciting. And then finally, we'll talk about the EDI portion of this. I think there's some pretty exciting things coming out that really will get some of the EDI guys who's doing some processing excited as well. We'll do a demo of the trading partner management that's prepared for us on the Azure portal. So let's go to the next slide here. Oops. Back up. So why integrate in the cloud? Well, one of the most significant difference for this hybrid model really is message flows, transformations, and pipelines, things we're pretty familiar with in the integration world. They're all running in shared resources in the Azure data center. And it's high density and it's a multi-tenant container. Another thing is scalable infrastructure. So dialing up that infrastructure depending on your resource needs, that's the elasticity piece of it. Obviously with integration, that goes a long way as well. B2B is more amenable in the cloud. So that just simply means that, we think that because of the challenges that we've had in the past with B2B, complex security settings, exposing services outside the DMZ, those type of things, we think that the cloud is really going to be the gateway on some of those new architectural patterns. And also reduce partner onboarding and management costs. Some of the other compelling reasons is that we can also do loosely coupled hybrid integration, integration without major network changes or updates. I think this is important and very compelling as well because, being able to integrate, as we saw in the poll, is typically pretty complicated. So I'm very excited to see where this is going. We'll also leverage existing BizTalk artifacts, or schema. So your typical XSD files or your schema files, we can move those around. Rapid configuration-driven development for common integration patterns. And then finally, reduce EDI costs and ease of management over VAN. Obviously, AS2 was definitely an improvement over the van. I think we're going to see the next stage here with cloud and the EAI toolkit. So first, let's talk about the BizTalk server, the infrastructure as a service, and the platform as a service. So today, we heavily rely on BizTalk server in regards to integration. So it's been around since 2000, and I think it's been really ringing true with CIOs and CTOs and leadership as a proven platform. So I think, we'll not spend much time on this, but I think sometimes you have to know where you've been to tell the story. So I kind of kick it off with that. But what I like to focus on more is the cloud piece. So with infrastructure as a service, now with the latest release of Azure, we have the capabilities to host durable virtual machines within Microsoft data centers. This is great news for taking BizTalk to the next level as an infrastructure as a service. I mean, think about, having those durable virtual hard drives that we can spin up BizTalk servers, for example, development in our test environments, definitely will save some time. In this presentation, I'm going to focus really on platform as a service. So with the latest release of Windows Azure Service Bus, EAI, EDI Labs, we can start to see how to leverage the power of the hybrid cloud in B2B scenarios. What's even more exciting is that we'll be able to move our development artifacts, such as the schemas between our on-premise BizTalk server, infrastructure as a service, and onto platform as a service. And then the Service Bus EAI, EDI is considered platform as a service because all of the infrastructure is managed for you. You can now create an integration solution without any infrastructure. Okay, so next let's talk a little bit about more specifically the Azure Service Bus EAI overview. So in the near future, we can start connecting our business partners into our line of business systems in a secure fashion using middleware and development tools that we're familiar with today, such as Visual Studio, for example, BizTalk. We can start hooking in our applications and services into this EAI bus or bridge, if you will. Scalability and the quick to market are really some of the most compelling advantages and reasons for exposing these integration services in Azure. Let's move on. So let's dive a little bit deeper in, and once you install the SDK for Azure EAI, EDI, you'll have access to all of the components in a familiar Visual Studio environment. So first, let's talk a little bit about how this works, how this process works. So we talk about how that works. We have, for example, a message that's going to be sent, and we have a receiver. So let's say that we're the receiver, and we need to get these messages in a way in which we typically can't do today. So our sender can basically send our messages over the typical .NET Web Client construct over HTTP, so REST. So all of your web applications, your external partners' web applications, mobile applications, and services can send these out to the cloud. And so what happens is you have this namespace deployed out on the service bus with an endpoint. And so anyone who can send messages over this protocol can basically send you, for example, orders. Now, on the other side, let's say internally we're the receiver. We can start consuming those messages from the service bus by basically referencing a service bus DLL from Azure and going through the service bus API. So if we get down a little bit deeper, let's talk a little bit about how do we do that. So bridges help to connect two heterogeneous systems. And so in the BizTalk world, bridges can be compared to, let's say, pipelines. Pipelines could be one or two-way depending on if you need synchronous versus asynchronous messaging, or in other words, if you need an acknowledgement message back, for example. And bridges can also validate, enrich, transform messages in your EAI or EDI solution. And we'll actually take a look at the configuration of one of those in the demo. Schemas are no different, really, than any other XSD file. In fact, you can use your current schema files in the EDI Azure solution easily. And then finally, transformations are similar to BizTalk maps and serve the purpose of converting one format over to the other. And maps, contain at least two schemas. One is the source and the other as the destination. Those transforms are really included in the bridges. So if you think about the bridge as the endpoint out on the service bus, the bridge can include schemas to know what to validate on that endpoint, and it can also include the transformations or the maps. So as soon as it comes through the endpoint on the service bus, you'll have basically your order fulfillment type PO, for example. So it'll be already converted to your internal schema. So with that, I'd like to get a little bit into the demo. And I think because of the screen resolution, you may have to scroll left and right. There's a lot to put on this, and I think live meeting, it's hard to get all the content on there, so you may have to scroll. So let me share that content now. All right, I'll just give that a second, make sure everyone can see it. Okay, so first let's do a lap around this. So as soon as you download the SDK, you'll have some of these new development artifacts available to you. You can see here that on the right, if we just take a tour here of some of the components that I have, basically this process is going to be an order, basically external trading partner sending an order up to the service bus, and our company is going to consume those orders off the service bus. And then, we can do whatever we want with them, but from there we can send them to our order fulfillment system and so on. So with that, though, we have our typical schemas. So the PO1 and the PO2 are basically the external trading partner schemas. So we can expand those. So no different than any other schema that we use today. But the external trading partner said, well, we've got two different types of schemas that you need to process, and we can do that. The PO is basically our internal purchase order. So you can think of that as your canonical. You can think of that as maybe your specific order fulfillment system schema. So if we open that up, you can see that, it's very similar. Now, how do we get that information from our external trading partners format to ours? Well, we do that with transformations. In the BizTalk world, they're called maps. Let's open up one of those. But you can see here we have two maps. One is for the PO1 transformation to our internal system schema, and the other is the second external trading partner PO to our internal system. And you can see here, just like a BizTalk map, we can basically easily transform those from one schema to the next just by dragging those from the source to the destination. You also have your typical functoids and processing. You can add all kinds of different tools, extract, string extract, concatenate, just like you can in BizTalk. So very powerful. What's important to remember, though, while I go through this is we're going to deploy this solution out to the cloud. So this is not going to be hosted on BizTalk server. This is not hosted on my laptop. We're actually going to deploy this to a namespace out on Service Bus. So the final piece of this puzzle is the bridge. So here, think of it as a flow, if you will. Very similar to orchestration, perhaps, but it really defines the flow of the endpoint that we're really dealing with. So with here, we have bridge orders. This is our bridge. And you can see here in the toolbox that there's a couple different types of bridge. If we were to send an acknowledgement back, obviously we would have a request reply or a two-way. So with this bridge, again, when we deploy this particular shape here will be the endpoint deployed to Service Bus. Let's look at the configuration for that. Okay, so those of you who are familiar with BizTalk pipelines, very similar. We have stages here. You can see that in the first stage, we identify some message types, so we can add the different types of messages that the trading partner would like to send to us. In this case, we have the PO1 and the PO2. So that really tells the endpoint, hey, this is the construct, or this is the types of the strongly typed messages that we expect. We can also have validation stages. In this case, it's a well-formed XML document. We can also identify additional enrichment stages. But for this demo, we're going to go straight into transformations or maps. And so here we have basically listed our two maps that I demoed a few seconds ago. And we go back to the flow. Okay, the endpoint received the purchase order at this point, and now the endpoint transformed it to our internal purchase order, which is processed by our order fulfillment system, for example. But what do we do with it? So we've transformed it to our internal schema. At this point, what we've decided to do in this demo is we're sending it to a queue. We're basically sending it to a queue, and we call that queue orders. So within the Azure portal, we can create, and I'll show you this in a minute, we can create a namespace, and then we can create queues to basically persist these messages. Now, just like the promise of BizTalk, where the term is called durable messaging, this is a flavor of that. So we're persisting the messages as soon as we do the transform. And that way, we can queue up all the orders. So if we have 500,000 orders coming up through this endpoint, we can scale that up, and we can put it into these queues, and then process them off the queues using the Service Bus API. Okay, so from there, it's simple as right-click and deploy. A few things with this. In order to deploy out to the cloud, there's security token that you basically have to set up. It has to know what account to send it to. So there's some security mechanisms in order to actually deploy out there. So with that, let me actually share the portal at this time. Give that 1 second. Okay, so at this point, this is the portal, and this is from the AppFabric labs. And you can see here that I've got basically I logged in with my Windows Live ID. I've created a new namespace. So here's where you can create a new namespace. In this case, I've actually created one called Salon Labs Order Processing. So this is where I tell Visual Studio to deploy that endpoint. And you can see here that we've got that deployed out there. Now, there's a couple of things to mention through here. Now, that's basically it. In terms of the cloud and the infrastructure, everything else is platform as a service, remember? So it's really the infrastructure and all that is taken care of by Microsoft Azure. But a couple of things to note here. On this service bus, when you start to connect into this, there's a couple of things you need to know. First, the key, as I mentioned, the security around that. We can do a view on that. And basically, anytime you interact with the service bus, you have to supply the owner and also the key. And so that's one of the security measures there that we need to do. Also, you can see that the endpoint is published here. So some pretty interesting information about that. Now, really, that's pretty much it for setting this up. So at this point, I've basically I have an integration solution running in the cloud right now. Now, for demo purposes, I have a couple of applications that I'd like to demo that basically one sends a message out to this endpoint, and the other one receives, which is our internal systems. We're going to use that Service Bus API. So let me share that. So first, let's talk about the sender. Now, this is basically just a console app that we have, and what it's going to do is basically call the message sender class here, and we've got a purchase order file on our local disk here that we're going to send. And so here you can see we use the typical web client construct provided by .NET. So anybody can send orders as long as they have the security token, connection information. You can see here on the program that we have, basically I have it in a constant class here, user info, that we're getting the issuer name, key, we're getting the bridge address, what file to send, and then the content type. And here we're just telling it we're using the REST protocol. So that's really it for setting it up. But really the key takeaway on this is web client API, the standard API, there's nothing needed on the external trading partners other than just call this and sending it out to the bus. Okay, so our next program, and before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and run this to actually send a message out to that. The message was sent successfully out to our endpoint. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the receiver program. And again, this is just a simple program, console app. What's different about this, though, is I'm using the Service Bus API. So if we look at the references, you can see indeed that I have the Microsoft.ServiceBus API. And that's kind of important because we can actually pull the messages right off the queue. So you can see here we have a messaging factory. We also have a queue client class. And between those two, that's really all we need, other than, again, if we go back up to our controlling program, you can see that, again, I have a key, the name, namespace, and a queue path identified. So I'm going to run that, and then I need to share this program as well. Okay, so you can see here that it actually received it off the Service Bus. Now this is actually running on my laptop. I've called the Service Bus API, and I said, okay, do you have any messages in the queue? And we pulled down this message and basically displayed the XML content. Okay. So with that, I think we're ready to get back into the deck. Let's go ahead and review the flows around that. So here was the flow that we actually just saw in action. So we see that Northwind is the external trading partner, and it used the web client .NET API to basically post an order out to the queue. Now, the Service Bus, again, our bridge was deployed out there. And Contoso, in this case, it's going to be our internal company. We're using the Service Bus Message Factory Queue Client API to get those messages off. Now, there's a couple of different scenarios I want to talk about real quick around this demo. Now, in our last webinar, we talked about the Service Bus Relay Service, which is not part of the EDI labs, but it's another compelling example, and this is live and it's ready to go. But in this scenario, and here's a link of actually, it's on our website under Solutions, BizTalk. We actually have the full video there available for you. But in that case, we actually deployed a Service Bus endpoint, a relay, and we basically opened up a connection. that was listening for incoming messages, in this case purchase orders again from Northwind. Northwind being the external partner in this case. And then once we open up a connection, in this case we can relay the messages, and what I did was I used BizTalk Service Bus Connect adapter, and so that can connect right into the Service Bus relay service. And we use WCF adapter for that to basically pull in that message and then route to our order fulfillment line of business systems. Now, one other scenario around this is if we were to take this a step further, in 4 to 6 months when the next version of BizTalk is released, BizTalk 2010 R2, this is another scenario where we'll start to see some of those adapters being able to support REST to go out to those queues and pull down messages. So in this scenario, and this is kind of compelling as well, especially if you already have BizTalk, but you need to do additional integrations on premises in a hybrid scenario. So this is definitely a hybrid infrastructure setup. And again, Northwind, this part is the same. You can send messages to that same queue. This is actually the same, but the only difference now is we're using BizTalk to go out and pull that queue. So let's talk a little bit about the EDI piece. So the EDI in the past has been challenging in terms of configuration, the infrastructure, and cost. And so now we can create integration scenarios, including trading partner and agreements, without any infrastructure. I think that alone is a pretty compelling statement. I'm really excited about seeing, where this goes. But now we can leverage a hybrid integration solution with existing EDI types. So we can use your existing 850 messages and so forth, your 810 invoices, 856 ASNs. But I think what's interesting to see is, the EDI types such as the AS2, the FTP, and HTTP is still supported on this. So here's kind of the flow of a typical EDI scenario using the Azure Service Bus EDI. So you can see here on the left, we'll go from left to right, we have an X12850 EDI message, purchase order. In this case, Contoso is external, trading partner, and they would like to send us an order, which we'll gladly take over FTP. Now, remember the bridge that we talked about in the demo. One of the things we can do is also have the bridge use a protocol FTP. So we can actually have that deployed out on the cloud as well. So again, no FTP configuration on premises. It can basically pull that FTP location and pull that file in. At that point, we go through our EDI bridge, which does your typical trading partner resolution, validations. You can do your transformations, just like we saw in the EAI solution, and XML bridges. So here you can see that from there we can pull it off of the Azure. We can run it through our line of business relay running IIS. We can send it to SAP. We can send it to whatever line of business system we want to send it to. We're near the end here, and finally I'd like to talk a little bit about the trading partner management, because this is one of the biggest things I've seen out in the field where, it's important to have a user interface and a portal to really manage the EDI aspects and fields and transports and agreements that we're used to today. So I thought it was pretty important to kind of share that with you. So let me do that now. I'm going to share that portal. So hopefully you can see this. This is the trading partner manager that's offered in Azure. And so here you can see we typically have our partners that we set up, our agreements, the resources. We can even enable some tracking and some advanced settings as well. So let's just add very quickly a trading partner, for example. So we'll click Add Partner. and we'll name this Microsoft. Okay, that's enough for now. Save it. So at this point, we have a few partners identified. Let's go ahead and create agreements. So let's click on Create Agreement. And here we can name this Salon to Microsoft Agreement. And we can, do your typical qualifier. We can do a ZZ mutual. Do that on both. Let's just make up. And then here's something interesting. We can actually see this in tracking. There's actually a tracking portal to this dashboard as well, so you can start to see these messages come through. We'll just enable all of them. Okay, the next thing is we did the general settings. We're talking about the receive. How do we receive? So we can use HTTP, AS2, FTP, just like we do today. We can also talk about the transformations. Again, this is how we transfer those messages into the next version. And then also routing. So here's your routing settings. Very familiar to what you would do today, and this is more in particular around the service bus and where those things are going. And then finally, you can deploy this agreement. Some of the advanced settings, though, is also available. So some of the things that you do, the protocol, you can see your advanced settings here. You can actually set up your schemas. We can upload some of those. Advanced settings. Here's your typical EDI configurations. This should be pretty familiar to those in that field. Validations. Internal settings. Split interchange. So you can see that all this is going to be integrated. No infrastructure. And I think this is a pretty easy to use interface as well. So with that, I'm going to switch back to the deck. Okay. So in summary, this is what we've talked about. We talked about the top compelling reasons to integrate in the cloud, BizTalk server as it exists today, and really where it's going. More specifically, we talked a little bit about infrastructure as a service, but really the meat of the presentation was really around platform as a service, specifically around the next bullet item there, Azure Service Bus, EAI, and EDI. That's really your middleware in the cloud, if you will. And then finally, the hybrid integration of order processing. So at this time, I'd like to take some questions.
Thank you, Stan. If you have a question for our presenter today, please take a moment to enter it into the Q&A tab at the top of the window. We have a question there already, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and ask it. So the question is, do messages have to be pulled from the service bus, or can they be pushed to the destination server?
In terms of the receiver, yeah, it will have to come through the service bus. There's not going to be a straight through from the sender to the receiver on that.
Okay. And how much does using the hybrid cloud integration solution cost?
Yeah, so I almost did a slide around that, but I figured I'd just talk about it if it came up. And so right now, it's in the labs format. I can kind of give you an idea. Let me just share this real quick. I'm going to share the calculator for this, just to kind of give you an idea of how the pricing model is done. Let me share this again. So hopefully you can see this. You may have to scroll again. What we have here is the Microsoft Windows Azure calculator page. So you can see here I've clicked on the full calculator tab. If I scroll down, I think what will start to give us a good idea of what this looks like. There's a service bus section here. And really the way Azure typically works, it's around consumption, whether it's bandwidth, whether it's hours, metering, but it's really the utility pricing. But we can see here that, for example, messaging, I think this is going to be a base part of the pricing. So you can see here, let's say I wanted to process, I don't know, let's say 47 million messages. It's around a penny a message, so that ends up to be around $47. I think we'll see something similar to relay. You know, we may have some relay hours around that. Well, I'll just leave it there. 22,965 hours, around $22. So I think it's definitely going to be around the service bus. The messages that it's processing is going to be a part of it, and then some type of hour metering as well, as long as you have it deployed out to the cloud. It's a good question.
Okay, so I guess this is a follow-up to that. What is the best approach to getting started with this type of technology?
Yeah, so I didn't get too far into how I set all this up, but I would say the first thing to do is, for one, I would say, involve an experienced partner such as Talon, to kind of help guide you through those low-hanging fruits, get you familiar with perhaps one integration, for example. But really, to really get down to it, you would need to download the SDK for Azure EDI Labs. That'll give you all the deployment and development artifacts required in Visual Studio to actually develop this. So that's the first part. In order to do that, you'll need a Windows Live account, be able to sign into to Azure, and typically, in order to start using it, there's definitely some free trial time there, and depending on your company, you may have some MSDN benefits. I would definitely like to talk to you about that and some ways that you can get some Azure going. So this is a piece of Azure, obviously, the integration piece. And then finally, just start, looking at some of the samples and SDKs that are out there. Thank you.